G'day guys and welcome back to Supercoach with DR. For today's video, I thought I'd take a quick look at my boys the Brisbane Lions and trying to predict who I think will be their best 22 in 2020. But probably more importantly, which players from the list I think will be Supercoach relevant, which players I think we need to keep an eye on and keep a track of their pre-seasons, and which players I think we can cross off our lists pretty much straight away and won't be Supercoach relevant at all for us in 2020. The idea of the video isn't to go into really in-depth review on each one of the players in the list, but as I said, just to give you a bit of an idea about what our best team will look like next year. I'll then also look at some of those players that I think are next in line and really pushing for a spot next year in our best side, or those players that may be just an injury or two away from breaking into the side as well. So firstly, let's have a look at who I think will be our best 22 in 2020. Starting with the backline, we've got Birchall, Andrews and Rich, Bailey, Gardner and Archie. The centres, we've got Robbo, Neil and Hugh McCluggage. The forwards, we've got Link McCarthy, Eric Hipwood, Cam Rayner, Charlie Cameron, the Big O, Dan McStay. In the rucks, we've got Steph Martin, Jared Lyons and our captain Dane Zorko. And finally, the interchange, I've got Alex Witherden, Jared Berry, my favourite player on the Brisbane list, Marcus Adams, and Cam Ellis-Yeoman, who's just made his way over from Adelaide. So the first thing we'll do is we'll eliminate some of the players who I think will not be Supercoach relevant in 2020 for the Lions. The first one we're going to knock off is Darcy Gardner. Love him as a player, can play on the tools, can play on the smalls. Really underrated player in my opinion, but simply not going to be Supercoach relevant for our sides in 2020. Same goes for Lincoln McCarthy. Same goes for Hipwood and the Big O, being those key position players. Simply won't get enough of the ball and don't have that scoring potential. Same goes for Dan McStay there. Steph Martin at 501, I'm ruling out this year. I think we've got too many young up-and-coming rucks to select from, and obviously the two big boys in Grundy and Gawn. So Steph, I don't think will be Supercoach relevant for us anymore going into the future. It's an interesting one. I've put a big no on Alex Witherden. Now, as you know, if you've watched my last video, I had him as a possible breakout contender last year for a number of different reasons. But this year, I don't think there's going to be enough of the Supercoach pie to go around in our backlines, particularly with players like Daniel Rich down there as well. Marcus Adams, a big no for me at 316,000. And also Cam Ellis-Yeoman, over 500,000. I don't think is going to be a relevant option for us this year. So the next players we'll have a look at are some possible breakout contenders. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail about these blokes because I've covered most of them in some of my previous videos. So Zack Bailey we've talked about at 263,200. What interests me also about Zack Bailey is his really low time on ground last year. Now, I'm not exactly sure why that was. He came up at just above 70%. So if he can push that to 75, a bit close to 80, then his scoring potential could really improve there. Talked about Cal Archie from the Suns, who's made his way over to Brisbane in a previous video. Done a review video on Huey McCluggage. Cam Rayner, haven't talked a lot about. There could be some value there at 251,000. I think he can probably make his way up to that sort of 350, maybe max out at 400. But it's all about if he can build up his tank, Cam Rayner, and play a little bit more in the midfield for me. And finally there, for the last breakout, we've got Jared Berry. He's at 461,000, so on the more expensive side of things. But as I say, he's my favourite player on the list. I love everything that Jared Berry does. But I don't know if he presents enough value there at his starting price. Certainly wouldn't completely rule him out, but I'm not looking at him too closely as much as I love Bez. Right, so the next set of players we're going to have a look at here are those players that for one reason or another, I have some question marks on, and I'd be a little bit concerned actually starting these players in my initial squad. Harass Andrews is the first one we'll look at. Love him as a player. In my opinion, the best young key position player in the game. Really mature young man. And along with Jared Berry, I think that most Brisbane Lions supporters would agree that they're our future captains of the club. With Andrews, he's got those long Inspector Gadget arms and loves to spoil. The main issue we have there is that we don't get a heap of Supercoach points for spoils. I think that you do get some points. I'm not exactly sure what the secret formula is. I've tried to look into it, but haven't been able to track that down. So if anyone can let me know about that, then that would be fantastic. I'd really appreciate it. What I'd love to see Andrews do for our Supercoach sides is take some more intercept marks. So rather than whacking that ball 30 rows back, actually take the mark. And I think that will translate into some much better points for Harass Andrews. But as I said, certainly one that I wouldn't completely rule out. But if we're looking at his price, basically 450k, there's better options around that price point, in my opinion. Next player we'll have a look at is Mitch Robertson, the human cannonball. Certainly a fan favourite of all Brisbane Lions supporters. I was close to putting a stop sign on Mitch, but thought that due to the fact that he'd locked down, a wing role and had a career best season last year, that I wouldn't completely rule him out. But with mid-only status, someone I'm not really looking at that carefully. Charlie Cameron, so you could also argue, it could be a no. But again, won All-Australian honours last year for a career best year, and is looking to improve his forward craft when playing against particularly those big-bodied defenders, such as Grimes, which I really like. An excitement machine. When he's got the ball, we know what he can do with it. Does he get enough of the ball to translate that into really solid Supercoach scores? Probably not, and his consistency is probably something that would worry me a little bit with Charlie as well. Next one, Lyons, an absolute revelation for the Brisbane Lions last year, and I think a big reason why we really took that next step as a side is a contested ball and clearance beast. Look, there could be a smidgen of value at his price, but if I'm paying 535k for a mid, I'd probably want him to be a keeper. And in my opinion, he's just not going to make it to that, elite bracket of Supercoach scoring mids for mine. But don't rule him out. Could be a little bit of value there. But you'd have to ask yourself the question, is Lyons going to be a keeper? And the final question mark I've got here, our captain, Zorko the Magician. So at times, look, he hasn't dealt with the tag really well, but I think now with Lachie Neale in the side, he may be set for a little bit more freedom. The thing I love about Zorko is that he works so hard to make an impact on the game when he doesn't have the ball in his hand, or maybe when he's getting beaten by a tagger. Elite defensive pressure, was our leading tackler inside 50. At 579,000, it's a pretty steep price for Zorko, I think, but could be a great pod in our midfields. At 579, as I said, I'm not going there at this stage, but never rule out Zorko the Magician because he's a magical player and an absolute gun. I've actually got the binoculars on Grant Birchall, so we know what type of a player Birch is. He's an absolute champion, 4-time premiership player, that raking left foot, loves to run off the half-back line, and he's done that for years at Hawthorn. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, he simply hasn't been able to get onto the park. But I think with Brisbane's elite medical staff, that they'll be able to do that for him this year. Well, fingers crossed anyway. We saw what happened with Lincoln McCarthy last year, who had just been dogged with injuries through his whole career, Lincoln. So with Birch, he's certainly not going to be a keeper, I don't think. But he could be someone that we could use as a stepping stone, similar to maybe a Dylan Robertson, maybe from the Saints. He's 30 grand dearer than Robertson, but we know what Birchall is capable of. As I said, past his best, but definitely someone to keep a lookout for. And if he can play, 18 to 20 games this year, which may be a stretch, he could be a really solid selection there. All right, so that brings me to the first tick. As you can see, there's not too many ticks that I've actually got here because I think there's a few question marks with lots of the players around Brisbane. But one of the guys I think you can pretty safely select is Daniel Rich. We know he's a previous Rising Star winner. Richie had a great rookie year, fantastic rookie year, and I think many of us thought this guy's going to be in the absolute elite bracket of mids, but it's never really happened for Richie in the midfield. But last year, coming out of the back line, one of our best players, I think, and Supercoach-wise, I think almost a career best year. Really consistent scorer as well. He led the Lions for total rebound 50s, marks and kicks last year. As we know, loves to kick the ball, not a very big handballer, an average of 18 kicks. And with someone with Rich's boot on him, those long raking left foot kicks, 50 plus metres, they're going to score you points. Another great thing about Richie last year was his metres gained, 525 metres on average per match. So, look, at 525 is a similar price to your Rory Lairds. He's a bit more expensive than some of those breakout options like your Houstons and your Dawsons. little bit cheaper than your Caleb Daniel, who I'd probably prefer over Rich, just due to that real consistency from week to week. Not a huge difference between them, but definitely keep a lookout for Richie. He's someone that you could pretty safely select. As I said, at his price point, there are a few options, but I think he'll be a good pod this year, Rich, and someone that we can definitely select without too many worries. Will I select him in my side? I don't think so. No, but certainly don't count him out. And the last player. Yeah, I had to give this guy 3 ticks, Lachie Neale, because I think that he simply ticks all the boxes that you're looking for in a Supercoach player. He racks up the disposals, he gets you contested possessions, he gets you clearances, he tackles, he does basically everything Lachie Neale, apart from, get those contested marks, I suppose, which you wouldn't expect from a player like him anyway. He's one of the first players that I've selected this year in my Supercoach side, Lachie Neale. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about him because we know what he produced last year. I think he can improve slightly on that. It's certainly a high starting price at $658,000, but you get what you pay for, in my opinion. Right, so the best of the rest now. Who is next in line for a spot in the 22? In the backs, I've got Ainsworth, Starcevich, and Lester. Different types of players, I know. Mids, we've got Matheson, Lyons, Hinge, and Robertson. In the rucks, we've got Archie Smith, Connor Bellenden, and Matty Eagles. I've actually got an asterisk next to those guys because they can't be selected as a ruck this year. But I think that if Steph does go down, that Fagan may look to one of those two guys actually above Archie Smith. And in the forwards, we've got Bundy Christensen, Cedric Cox, and Eli Smith. So, for lots of these guys, I think we can knock off straight away. Noah Ainsworth was great for us last year as a rookie, but at that starting price, I don't think so. Starcevich we'll talk a bit about in a minute. Lester, not at that. Same as Matheson. Lyons at that price, we've got to have a look at. Same with Hinge. Pretty expensive for a rookie, but he has had a little bit of experience under his belt and may look to push into the side at some stage this year. David Robertson, I've also got some binoculars on because, look, we don't know what he's going to produce this year, but there is a fair bit of competition for that inside mid spot, along with players like Alice Yeoman. Archie Smith, as I said, I wouldn't look at at all. Bellenden and Eagles, only if Steph Martin goes down for an extended period of time. We may look to get them in as a cash cow if they get brought into the side, but very unlikely. Christensen at that starting price, I'm not interested in. Cox at 167 is such an exciting player. We talk about those players with X Factor. Reminds me a little bit of Archie as well, who have just brought in as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about Coxie. And Eli Smith, he was our first selection from last year's draft. Had a bit of an interrupted year last year due to injury, but managed to find some pretty good form in the NEAFL towards the end of the year. The trouble that someone like an Eli Smith has, along with Corey Lyons, Matheson, Dev Robinson, is that there is a lot of competition for that inside midfielder position. You could also say that Brandon Starcevich there in the backline could have claims for that spot. And look, I think that players like Ainsworth, Starcevich, even Archie, Birchall, and Alice Yeoman, I'm not too sure on exactly who's going to start out of those guys. I think you could, select a few pretty easily out of those guys. But, really not sure when it comes to a few of these names if they'll be starting or if they'll be, right on the edge there. But Starcevich, he's the man that everyone's talking about at Brisbane at the moment. Zorko's talked about him. I've heard, forget who the other player from memory was, but they're all really wrapping him up. I know they decided not to go away during the off-season, instead headed back home over to WA and just got straight into his training. He's a pretty quiet sort of fella, lets his actions do the talking, but all the news out of Brisbane is that this is the guy that may be able to push his way into our best side for round 1 next year. As I said, we've just got to have a look and see what their plans are for Starcevich. But certainly I think he's probably the first player that will come in if we have an injury, depending on which player gets injured. Now, if Hipwood gets injured, they're probably not going to bring a Starcevich in. But, he can play all around the ground. He can play back. He can play as an inside mid. Really strong. Worked on his running, as I said, in the off-season. So someone to definitely keep an eye on. Look, if he's in our round 1 side with that DPP status at 147,000, I think he's someone that we should have a serious look at. Corey Lyons, as I said, at 102,000. I'm loving the starting price, but again, I think he's probably behind Starcevic and probably Matheson at this stage. Hinge, as I said, may present a little bit of value if he gets games. Not really confident on him. And Dev Robinson, look, we're really not sure, as I said, what he's going to produce this year. Highly touted pick. I think he won or broke the record for the most disposals in the champs. I may be wrong. I may be just completely making that up, but I think that's correct. Who knows what we're going to see from him this year, but most likely, I think we probably spending most of the year learning the craft and the structure in the needful. Cedric Cox, I said, a really interesting one. Got all the talent in the world, this bloke, and I know that he's been trialled back, trialled forward. He did come in for 1 or 2 games, I think, last year. Didn't set the world on fire, but I've got really high hopes for Cedric Cox. And if he can break his way into the side and get a good run of games under his belt, he could be someone that could make us a fair bit of money. And Eli Smith, as I said, injured for most of last year. A first-round draft pick. High hopes for Eli as well. Has a bit of the Mitch Robbos about him. There was a bit of talk about the fact that he never smiles in any of his photos. But I think that's just the way he is. Not a big talker. Again, similar to Starcevic, lets his actions do the talking rather than use his words. But 123,900, if he comes into the side again and plays for a little extended run of matches, then he could be a good cash cow for us as well. So there we have it, guys. That's who I think is going to be in our best 22 in 2020. Hopefully I've provided a little bit of food for thought for you at the least. Look, I don't know for sure that these guys are going to be the starting 22. I'm just having a guess. I'm just basically going off the top of my head here. I haven't done a heap of research, as I think I know the guys pretty well, as I'm a pretty passionate Brisbane fan. I haven't, used any notes, or most of it's gone off the top of my head. So thanks again for watching, guys. I don't know if I'll get into too many of the other sides. I might leave that for the other experts and supporters of their own sides, but I'll be back soon with another video. Thanks again for all your support. Hope the planning's going well, and take care. Cheers, guys.